Hey Smarties, today we are discussing all things accommodations. We are discussing what they are, why they're important, and common misconceptions about them. We're really excited to share this conversation with you because we also chat about what makes accommodations different from modifications and the different goals of accommodations for different ages and stages. We are going to be talking all things accommodations for the next few weeks. We have 3 other episodes planned, so we are doing 4 parts on accommodations for the next month or so. Can't wait to dig into more. We're going to be talking about our favorite accommodations to use, what accommodations we have found to be more meaningful than others, and all sorts of things. So stay tuned and make sure to listen next week. If you are interested in working with either one of our practices, we would be honored to have a conversation with you. You can do that for free by just signing up for a phone call on our website, www.myedtherapist.com. That's Steph's website, or my website, which is www.kappedtherapy. That's Kapp with a K and 2 P's, edtherapy.com. And that's my practice, Kapp Educational Therapy Group, where we specialize in executive functioning skills challenges for learners. Steph's practice is My Ed Therapist, and they do all the things over at My Ed Therapist. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 347 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And accommodations.
Today, accommodations month is starting.
Yeah.
Today, let's just get right into it. Steph, what are accommodations?
Accommodations are tools and strategies that remove obstacles without changing expectations or requirements of the task itself. So, in other words, it's focusing on leveling the playing field.
Yep.
Not giving an unfair advantage.
That's really important, and that's something we will talk more about.
What came to mind when I was thinking about when you're leveling the playing field?
Yeah.
There's a lot of examples, but I think one of the first things that just popped into my head is that, you know, when they're running track in the Olympics and the person on the outside of the track doesn't start at the same exact place as the lanes on the inside of the track, they end up running the same distance, but they don't start at the exact same point because of the way the track is shaped.
Right.
So they still end up having to do the same thing, but it doesn't look the same. It looks like one, or, several of them get a head start.
Great analogy.
So that's what this is.
That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So it's important because of a law in our nation. We're talking about in the United States, obviously. And we were recording this on January 22nd, 2025, just in case things change. We are recording it as to what's accurate today. But there is a law that requires everybody to have equal access to education. And so the goal is to allow individuals to fully participate in both educational and work environments. We're mostly going to be talking about educational because obviously that's our domain, but this is something that you can think about in a work environment. Go back and listen to our episode with Jennifer. We're going to go ahead and link that episode in the show notes where she talks about getting accommodations in the workplace for her own disability. So like I said, there are different types of accommodations. There's educational, which is our focus, but you could do workplace accommodation, testing accommodation, daily living accommodations. We all do this all the time. Mm-hmm. We accommodate the world to have the best experience for ourselves. So like a mundane task, like grocery shopping, you can accommodate the amount of time it takes, the effort that it takes, or if you're like me, the fact that you can never find what you're looking for in the grocery store, which we've talked about in a lot of episodes, by using a third-party shopper. The same result happens. Your groceries are in your home, but you are going about it a different way. Like laundry, which is something that Steph and I talk about constantly. You can accommodate that by having somebody else do your laundry, teaching somebody else how to put it away, sending it away, a trash bag of it to like a fluff and folds, and let it be somebody else's problem. But that is an accommodation because the same results happens. Your clothes are washed and folded. So, Steph, how are accommodations different from modifications?
Okay, so this is important to sort of understand. Accommodations are provided through 504s and IEPs. So some examples could be extended time, assistive technology, preferential seating, things like that. The modifications are things where students whose disabilities significantly impact their ability to meet grade level standards, even with accommodations. So an example might be a reduced set of math problems, fewer problems on the page for homework, or fewer problems that they're getting tested on. That is a modification. So an accommodation is something to help a student reach the goal. A modification is changing the goal.
Exactly. Well, sometimes they could be changing the curriculum.
Right.
I think that's the most common one in academia.
Right. But what I'm saying is, let's say the goal is to learn how to read. The modification doesn't change that the goal is to learn how to read. It's how they get there. That's what I want to make clear. So it's not as if the overarching goal is changed, but the steps to get to the goal are different.
Right.
So, Rach, what are some misconceptions about accommodations?
I think there's a few really common misconceptions. The first is that they're giving someone an unfair advantage. That's exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. These accommodations are only addressing barriers to access or barriers to the goal.
Yeah.
So the accommodations are not lowering standards. Mm-hmm. They're accommodating to learners who have different, I'm talking in the educational environment.
For sure.
They're accommodating to learners who have different brains.
Yeah.
And require something slightly different, but it gives them access to an opportunity to be successful. Mm-hmm. So it's not a sign of weakness. That's another
so important
misconception about accommodations, is that they should be able to overcome it without it. We know so much more about the brain and about how learning happens in the brain than we did when we were students.
For sure.
In early elementary, middle, and high school. And it's not a sign of weakness to access accommodations. And it's also not something to have shame about at this point. And that the third misconception is that they can be really difficult to implement. Not always. Not always. I will say sometimes they are difficult to implement, but usually the difficult to implement accommodations aren't the ones that we want to prioritize anyway.
Or they're not the first line of changing of accommodations, right? You try all the other things first.
Right.
And I think that is an important part of it. You know, sometimes things like difficult to implement of like taking a student out for PE or something like that. But at the end result is that they might get that extra time that they need. It's important. That's something to think about, right? And so not to get in a cycle of, well, it's going to be difficult to do, so we're not going to do it. So this is going to be the most interesting part of this conversation because I hadn't really thought about this until we really sat down.
Yeah.
About how accommodations really look different by age group. So we're going to break this down.
Totally. This was the part that I think you and I, when we came up with this idea, this question, we were like,
Oh, yes.
Breaking it down like this is so clear and concise and helpful.
So helpful.
So let's talk about the ages and stages and what the goals are.
Yeah. So we're breaking it down: elementary, middle, and high school accommodations. We'll leave the college accommodations because we've had conversations about that in the past. But let's start with elementary school accommodations. What is the goal? The goal is to build foundational skills, manage behavioral challenges that come up, and create a supportive learning environment.
It's typically much more direct, much more hands-on because of their age and stage. They're still developing self-regulation. They're still developing their executive functioning skills, which, by the way, never stop developing. So it's much more specific, focused, direct, and hands-on.
And the support style, let's talk about that. This is going to be teacher-driven, basically adult-driven.
Yeah.
With adults providing direct hands-on support. And how are they doing that? Things like visual aids, manipulatives, sensory breaks, positive reinforcement, and the social needs that come up are structured social support that a lot of kids need.
Hands on.
All hands on deck, right? Okay, so let's talk about middle school.
Middle school, it shifts. And I want to say, we are saying middle school, but if your middle schooler isn't doing this yet, which a lot of learners who have learning differences or require accommodations or just have different things going on, executive functioning skills challenges, they may not be doing this yet. So I don't want parents to it's a fluid situation.
Yeah.
And so this is the goal. And this is often what I talk to parents about when we're talking on the phone call is the goal is independence and autonomy, but there is a really tenuous sort of dynamic that can emerge in middle school between the support style. In middle school, it really becomes the shared responsibility of the teacher and the student. Oftentimes, we see a gap in that student self-advocacy, and that's where we step in and help them sort of work through it. And sometimes that self-advocacy piece is because parents haven't yet stepped away because the student hasn't yet stepped forward to sort of handle things. So the real focus of accommodations in middle school tend to be executive functioning skills focused on their organization and their time management, and really focused on fostering that independence and autonomy. So Steph, what would you add?
So let's talk about some of the tools.
Yeah.
This is planners or calendars, chunking assignments, seating arrangements of where they sit in the classroom and who they sit next to or in the front or the back, things like that.
Yep.
And their social needs, there's a lot of peer interactions that need help navigating in middle school. It's a whole different ballgame in middle school than it is in elementary school. And I want to put in there, some kids have social goals. And so it's important to know that some of these things are not forgotten, because they are just as important. So this is where the parents start to step away. And as we always say, this is where parents become consultants and aren't managers as much anymore, because the teachers are doing part of it, but the students also need to start learning how to do it themselves. So this is that transitional period, middle school. So let's talk about high school.
High school. The expectation is that it's much more student driven. This could be much more challenging for learners who aren't self-advocating yet.
Yeah.
And that is where we can build in scaffolds, especially through educational therapy with our practices. You can build in scaffolds to help support them, advocate for their own accommodations. I think teachers really do expect it to come from students. And sometimes it comes from parents. And that's, again, the goal is to get that burden on the learner. The focus is independence. The focus is transition planning and what's going to happen after they graduate, and really bringing in some higher level tools. Steph, what are those types of tools?
So technology, right? You need a calculator in high school. You have a laptop. I mean, most elementary, middle school, they do now too, but it's also required in high school where it's not as required.
I went recently and I did a school visit. It's one of our favorite things that we get to do as educational therapists is go and see the schools. And I asked about the tech piece, and they said, from kindergarten through second grade, we keep everything here and we charge it for them.
Yeah.
From third through fifth, they're taking it home, and the expectation is that they're charging it for themselves. But obviously in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade, they still have chargers in the classroom to help support those kids. Yeah,
exactly. There's note-taking support. There's looking at college or next steps, careers, things like that are helping them know what the next step is, right? High school is where they're starting to have to put everything together on their own. And so this is where things get lost because there's a lot of tools out there and sometimes there's too many tools. So the thing is that especially with kids with ADHD, even though they are in high school, they might still be in the middle school phase.
Yeah, we always talk about that, right? That learners with executive functioning skills challenges, oftentimes with ADHD, but not always, they are operating 2 to 3 years younger than their peers.
So a 10th grader is still in the middle school phase, right? So it still needs to be adult and student driven, and understanding that not all teachers in the high school environment are able to collaborate in that way. And sometimes parents have to step in. Yeah. So I think knowing your learner and knowing what expectations there are, but then meet them where they're at so that they can learn to do it. If that means because the teacher wants the email to come from the student, you help the student write it and it comes from their email address, right? Rather than the parent email address. It's learning those skills to help them get to where they need to be. Quick recap. Elementary school, all adult driven. Middle school, shared. Adult and student. And then high school is supposed to be student driven with some adult guidance.
We'll get there.
100%. Okay, so that is the beginning part of our conversation about accommodations. Now we've set the stage. Stay tuned next week because we're going to talk about why some accommodations don't actually help.
We'll dig in.
Talk to you then. All right. Have a great week, Smarties.